Hi, my name is Vanessa Lech, and today with me we have a person that goes by Irate Veteran, VA Madness, his YouTube channel. I've been a fan of his for several years now. His name is Eugene. And so he's here with me today. I'm asking him all the questions I've had through the years I never had a chance to ask. I've been a big fan of his videos, and we share a lot of commonalities of our distrust and disdain of the VA in a lot of different ways. And I've enjoyed his sense of humor. So thank you for being on today, Eugene.
You are welcome. Happy to be here.
Okay, so the first question I have for you, obviously you're a military veteran, and we're going to get to your storied history with the VA that a lot of different veterans have. But I'm curious, what branch of the military did you serve in?
The Army.
So I was in the Army as well many years ago. So we have that in common. So what years did you serve in?
I joined in 1974 and I retired from service in 1995.
Wow, that's quite the span there. Okay. That's a long time. So how would you describe your overall experience in the military? Because I know it varies widely, and of course, what years you serve, there's so much politics that
it always goes, I think, by unit and assignment. I mean, there were some assignments that I absolutely loved, right? And there were other assignments that really, really sucked, right? So your attitude about service is, situational, right? So I think up to my 16th or 17th year, I absolutely loved being in the service, right?
Okay.
And after that point, they came up with some rules about how long you can stay in service. Right? And once I learned I only could go to 20, I was kind of pissed, right?
Really?
Because I joined the Army at 17.
Okay.
Right? I was 17 years old, right? So when my 20 years is up, I'm like 37, right? So why do I have to get out? When, for example, an officer, if I was an officer, I could stay in for till I'm in my 80s if they want. There was that, and I don't remember her name, a female naval admiral, right, who was serving into her 70s on active duty.
I think I know which one you're talking about, because I remember somebody being in their 60s.
Yeah, and she was inactive at points, but they brought her back active multiple times during different phases to do certain things that she was expert at. So when you're enlisted, you just don't have that opportunity. So at that point, when I found out that at my rank, and I wasn't going to get promoted after that point, my rank was set for the next few years. I was a little upset that I had to get out. And I think those last 3 years were a little disappointing in that I knew I was going to have to get out, because really, if there's no way I would have got out at 20. In other words, I love being a soldier, right? So if I could have served to 30, I would have, right? But since, they wouldn't let me, I had to, then you had to start transitioning at a certain point, right? Because you're not going to be in anymore, right? And it's kind of different when I think you're only doing your 3 or 4 years, because when you get out, you're still usually in your early 20s. And, I'm getting out and I'm almost 40, right? So there's a different, okay, what am I going to do when I get out type factor that is different from when you're in your early 20s. What are you going to do when you get out? So I think that bled over into my attitude. The last 3 years, I was unhappy, basically, because I couldn't stay longer. Right?
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's interesting. It's a unique experience, because my observations have been with many people in the military is that, I'm not even going to which branches, but quite the opposite of yours. I don't know of any, really, to be completely frank with you, and you've been in the military community most of my life, that have been, especially in the recent years, the last several years, last, I'd say 15 years, of anyone that's really happy about their military service experience situation, and certainly not Yeah, so I just, it's a different experience for sure. And through the last, I'd say, I don't know, 15 years, enlisted have been able to stay longer than 20 years if they chose to in many situations. And in many situations, they're having to in order to advance to the next rank. So it's constantly ebbing and flowing what's happening, especially with wars and stuff when they have like active conflicts globally where they need to deploy a bunch of people and they have issues with it, which they still do right now with recruitment and retention. That also changes the game as far as how long they let people stay in for, at least in the Army. Okay. That's just what I have seen. All the other branches I was familiar with, I know they have less people in the other branches. But yeah, most of the people I know of are not trying to stay in for longer than a very brief period of time, or they just can't wait to get out when their contract is over.
Yeah, and that's where,
or they're trying to hang on to the 20 because they're so close to it and they're not going to do one day over. So that's like the first time I've ever heard this before.
I think it like depends on, once you decide you're going to be a career soldier, for example, which I decided when I joined at 17, I was going to be a career soldier, right? So there was no doubt in my mind I was staying in, right?
Yeah.
So, and once I was in, I found I was suited to it, right? So I think that's what happens is I found that I was suited to it and I liked it, right? And I think when that leads to you, wanting to stay in any job that you like, right?
Yeah.
And I love being deployed, right? I love being in tactical environments. Garrison was my worst area. I hated being in, based in the United States and in garrison, right?
I think a lot of soldiers do. I mean, at least these days in the last number of years, because of the types of rules they have in garrison and what they have soldiers doing, especially lower ranking soldiers in garrison when they're not in the deployed environments.
Exactly. There's a lot of that, okay, the curb's got to be yellow. We got to paint them this afternoon and tomorrow.
Yeah. Lawn mowing.
Look at the leaves. We need to rake those, right? When you're in the field, forget all that crap, right? Is your perimeter manned? Right? Are the fighting positions built? So there's, anyway, I just really like being in. I was suited to it, and I think there are those people who are, right, and
right.
they choose to stay to that 20 point. Now, I will admit, like I said, I was a little, what do you want to call it, disenfranchised during those last couple of years because I was going to have to get out. And that last year I was in, yes, there was a point where I said, well, you know what? Maybe this isn't going to be so bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I actually looked at that as saying, I started, twisting over to that positive mode on getting out, right? To where finally I said, well, I got to get out anyway. I might as well, look at the positive side of it, right?
Yeah.
And of course, my positive side was thinking this. Everything in the military seems to not go well, right? Things are badly organized. They're, the leadership sucks, right? And so I was thinking when I get out, it's not going to be like that. It's going to be like wonderful working in the business environment, right? Working for, having to perform for your pay. And then, of course, when I got out, I found out that no, the civilian workplace is way less organized and more, the leadership is way worse than the military. And then I really looked back and thought, if there's an organization that you could say is at its top performing level, it would be the military, right? Because I know there's companies I've worked for, and I worked for a couple of the biggest companies in the world when I got out, and they were horribly managed, at least at the levels I worked at, right? And so I, even though I started looking forward to being a civilian, once I got to be one, it was, I was very disillusioned and started thinking, damn it, why couldn't I stayed into 30? But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, our experiences are definitely wildly different, to say the very least, because my experience is not the same at all. I got out after my first term of service, about 4 years. It's been almost 10 years now since I've been out, over 9 years, going on 10. And I have no regrets about getting out, and I'm really glad that I did. And I, you know, my experience of the leadership was different than yours for sure, and radically so, I would say. There were some good people I met, and some good leaders, but as a whole, there was a lot of bad stuff going on. I'll just leave it at that. So,
well, I agree with that. I mean, as far as
that was my experience, which is years later of yours.
My first line leaderships, almost in every single assignment, really sucked. They were bad, right? Mm-hmm. What I found where leadership improves vastly was at the battalion level, right? Company level leaders, captains, lieutenants, I found they were really bad in almost all situations, right? But once at the battalion level, I don't think I've ever had a battalion commander who I thought was making bad decisions, right? Or doing things badly. As a matter of fact, the few times where I went over my company leadership's head to my battalion commanders, almost in every instance, matter of fact, I can't think of a single instance where I did go over my company level to the battalion level with whatever complaints I might have, right, is that they were solved in every occasion in my favor, right? So yes, at the company level, I found, really bad management and leadership. And at battalion level, I had a different experience.
Okay. So what was your job? Another question, hey, I'm just curious. Did you switch? Because I know there's many people, especially people that have been in for more than one term of service, or whether they're...
I did.
Yeah. Because I've met...
a combat arms, which was 16 Romeo.
Okay.
Which was at the time a Vulcan crewman, right? They don't have those anymore, right? So it's a dead MOS now, right? And then later I switched to communications. Once my hearing was really started to go out, and they, I couldn't be in that field anymore where I needed like better hearing. So communications was an area where it didn't kind of matter, I guess, right? So because I was able to move into, at the time it was 31 Echo, which was I think called a field radio repairman. And then they changed that to something else later. I think it was 29 Echo or something. But either way, they so I had two jobs. One was in the Vulcan crewman, and the other one as in the communications repair field. So, and I enjoyed both of them very much. So,
okay, cool beans. So moving into the VA, so you get out of the military. What was your first interaction with the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, and how would you describe that initial interaction? I'm just curious because I remember mine kinda, and it was like the beginning of what I had no idea was about to become basically the bane of my existence.
So in my case, part of my retirement briefing was filing for disability benefits if you had a disability, right?
Yeah.
And it was a very short briefing. It's like maybe 10 minutes. They threw some paperwork at us and said, fill it out, right? And so I filled it out. And one thing they made clear in my briefing, because it was a retirement briefing, right? So we were all retiring, everyone in that briefing. And they made it really clear that you can't draw both your retirement and VA disability at the full rate. Whatever you get for VA disability will be subtracted off your retirement pay, right? So they made it clear you're not getting more than your retirement pay, right?
I really think that's a really unfair rule to begin with, because when people spend 20 years, and I was in my unit, there were a handful of people that my unit was really unique, just to be clear, that I was in. A handful of people that were retiring or on their way to retiring at 20 or more years. And one thing that really struck me is whether they were officers or enlisted in the Army, their bodies were so badly broken. It blew my mind. Like, we're talking about like their backs were so bad. Like, it was just wild how horrible their backs were. And just like really like their bodies at that age, it was like they were abnormally broken compared to like the general population. You know what I mean? It really freaked me out.
Yeah,
That's why another reason I was like, let me get out of here before things get worse.
Definitely, because I mean, that was me. I mean, my body, even though I wanted to stay in, my body was broke. I mean, in many ways. Matter of fact, my hearing got to be so bad after my last deployment that they finally rated me where I wouldn't even have been allowed to stay in. Right.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, so even if I wanted to, I wouldn't have been able to. Right. So, yeah, that's very true. But the longer you serve, the more likely you're going to have, you know, a lot of things wrong with you. Right. So, but anyway, so that retirement briefing, you know, let me know that it really didn't matter what I filed. So I really didn't care. I just filled out the paperwork, put it in. One thing I was interested in, though, is one of the things they said was if you had over a 20% disability rating, you'd be eligible for a vocational rehab, right, program, right? So I was interested in that because, you know, all I knew was Army. I was starting to think, you know, what am I going to do when I get out? That I had no idea what I might be able to do, right? So I thought this vocational rehab might be a path to employment, right? So, and my rating come back at 30%. And again, I wasn't going to get any more money, but what it did tell me was I was eligible for that program, right? So, which I applied for immediately, which was then denied. Right. So, you know,
wow.
My first experience with applying for benefits was a denial, right?
Oh, God.
And because it was denied for something that I thought right away was like stupid, right? So before I got out, I was my last duty assignment was Fort Gordon, Georgia. And I ran into I don't even remember where I ran into this guy at, but it was at something to do with career transition, though. And this guy said, well, you know, I know where, you know, you might think about, you know, sales. And I'm like thinking, me in sales? You know, how do you get that? I don't know. But he said, you know what? Why don't you come down and talk to my boss at my work? And this was a car sales place, right? Okay. So I said, I'm like, well, you know, okay, now I'm still on active duty, right? And he said, so I went down and I talked to this guy and he says, well, why don't we bring you in on part-time for training and maybe you'll want to do this, right? So I'm like, you know, what the hell, right? So I said, I went down and I checked it out, right? Went through their little training thing. So that's why I got denied vocational rehab, right? Because they said, in their evaluation, they said, well, you went out and you checked out this car sales thing, right? And
How did they even know about that, Eugene?
Well, because in the interview with the voc rehab guy, you know, I didn't hide anything. I told them I had went and checked out this car thing that I made sure I told them didn't work out, right? Yeah. But he thought, well, you know, it looks like you might have a career in that. And I'm thinking, did you miss the part where it didn't work out? You know, so I wasn't able to do that, right? So that was my very first experience, and I was really disappointed. But then I ended up moving from, you know, when I retired, I moved from Georgia. I actually had bought a house in South Carolina, right across the border. From Georgia, and my marriage broke up right when I retired. So I thought, you know, I'm from Minnesota. I'm not timing of it all. My wife, yeah, exactly. My wife is from the South, so I'm like, well, there's nothing for me here. So once I, my marriage broke up, I moved back to Minnesota. But what I did was I reapplied for the program when I got to Minnesota, right? And they brought me in for another vocational assessment, right? And this time I was approved. So I started voc rehab. And actually that, it was kind of funny. I wanted to go into criminal justice, right? That's what I wanted to do.
What area of criminal justice?
Any area, but I was hoping to be a probation officer, right?
Okay.
But then the vocational assessor, once he told me he was going to approve me for the program, I kind of didn't want to rock the boat. And he said, no, criminal justice, you don't want to do that, right? And I said, well, why don't I want to do that, right? And he says, well, first of all, your age. And he was exactly right. Once I went and checked, right, because I had turned 38 by the time I got out. Oh, well, after I was out a while, right? So, and in my state, the upper limit for being hired as a probation officer was 37, right? So
there was age limits.
Yeah,
right?
There was. I was surprised.
I had no idea there was an age limit on that.
In my state, there was, right?
Wow.
So I don't know if that's true in all states, but in mine, I was already too old at 38, right? So that kind of blew my, my thought about being a probation officer. I knew my body was way too broke to be, a foot officer. I thought the probation area would be a good fit. But either way, now that wasn't so he talked me into, since I was trained in electronics in the military, to go into an electronic program, which I did, right? And that was a 2-year program. They paid for it, and I was paid the the stipend at the time. I think everyone still gets that with voc rehab. So it was a 2-year program. I got a degree in electronics, and through the program, through school, they have the career placement with the school I was in, and through that, I was actually hired and got a pretty good job out of it.
Okay, so I'm going to go backwards a little bit. Should have asked you this to begin with, but can you just do a quick rundown of like what vocational rehab is for people that may not be real familiar with it? Because quite frankly, I have a general idea of what it is, but I'm not, like, I haven't utilized it and don't know all the details of it either.
Well, okay, so voc rehab, once you meet the qualifications, where I don't know if it's changed over the years. I don't think it has. I think it's still a certain level of rating. At the time I got out, it was 20%. I think it's 10 now, but I'm not sure. But anyway, and basically once you meet the criteria, which is just having that level of impairment at a 20% level or whatever it is now, then they will help you find career placement based on your limitations, right? So, and that's basically what that vocational counselor that you're going to meet with once you apply for the program is going to help you into a career path where your limitations aren't a factor, right? So that's basically what it is getting you into a career path that you'll be able to perform at with your limitations, right? So, and that worked for me, right? They looked at that, okay, can I physically do, electronic repair, right? Which is the career field I was going to be going into as a civilian. And they did all it, and because they do a full vocational assessment, right? So they look at your physical and mental disabilities and say, okay, it looks like this would be a good fit for you and you should be able to get employment when you're done, because the object of the program is to get employed, right? So, and again, considering your limitations, right?
Yeah.
So, and that worked out for me.
Okay, so how throughout the years, how would you describe your experiences with the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs? Because I've watched your videos. I don't think I've watched every single one, but I've watched most of them. I've watched some more than once. And not so much because I really even need the information in them, but because of your personality. I find you to be very humorous and And I've had a lot of interaction with the VA. And so I can really relate to a lot of the things that you describe and talk about and your experience, your interactions with them, basically. So I can relate to a lot of that. But yeah, I mean, how would you describe your experiences with the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs throughout the years? Because clearly that wasn't the end of the road with your experience with the VA, the voc rehab thing, because it almost sounds like it is, but from those videos, it's clear you have a lot of experience.
Right.
And some of the things that I take away too from your videos is like, you sound like a lawyer. You sound like a lawyer. You're talking about like case law. You're going so deep in it. Like I feel exhausted sometimes when I like watch these videos because I'm just like,
Well,
how did you keep going?
That's what it takes to get to know what it. You have to know those things if you're going to be able to, you know, follow the path to successful service connection, right? It's there are so many twists that may be involved in every situation that in order to understand them, you have to have a full understanding of, I mean, the regulations, the adjudication manual, case laws involved.
So what inspired you to start the VA Madness YouTube channel?
All right. So, all right. That's where the path takes up. Okay. So voc rehab finally worked out, right?
Okay.
But what eventually happened was my disabilities that I got from service, finally, I just couldn't work anymore. I ended up getting downsized from that first job I had that I got from voc rehab, which I worked at for like 7 years. What can I do? Can I take menial jobs, right? And I tried to take a couple. I ended up, trying to do some odd jobs, and I found, I wasn't physically suited to do these things. And finally, I said, okay, what am I going to do? So I thought, well, I wonder if I can update my veterans benefits. So that's what actually led me to file for my claims again. Was I was unable to get employment with my disabilities that I had, even at the lowest level. And so in 2013 or 2012, I think it was. So I was out.
So are you referring to total disability, individual unemployability, TDIU?
At the time, no, because I had no idea what that was.
Okay.
But I knew when I got out, they had denied a bunch of the things I filed for, right?
Oh, wow.
So I was thinking all along, it bothered me that they denied these things. But
yeah,
to me, what was the point? I couldn't get any more money even if I won these claims. What would be the big deal? But I had no idea that in 2004, they changed the law, right? So in 2012, when I started researching benefits again, I found out that if you get over a 50% disability rating, right, you can also draw your full retirement. Right? So you could draw all of your VA disability and your retirement if you had over a 50%. Well, I had 30%. So I'm thinking, well, crap, I'm going to retry to get these things they denied service connected.
Yeah, let me stop you right there. That you bring up an interesting point when you say that all those years ago, a lot of the things I claimed were denied. And I remember when you said earlier, I was in a very brief and basically informational session for people that are about to retire out of the military. And they basically threw some paperwork at us and said, fill it out. And then you claim those things. Many of them got denied. All these years passed by, and then you're at it again. And that just kind of reminds me of just the situation of the progression. Can't speak for your time, but like now in recent years, I've noticed, and like to 10-year time span window when it comes to like veteran law specifically, it's totally different because like even when I was getting out, which was almost 10 years ago now, there was such a lack of information. Even the Veteran Service Organization officers that were trying to help people probably didn't know a lot of what they were doing either. And there's a lot of lack of information. And God knows the VA, nobody with their big ass budget are coming around to like, let's help you out. And I remember actually coming into contact with a VA employee first time ever on joint. It's called Joint Base Lewis McChord now, but it was Fort Lewis, Washington. It was a woman, I remember, and I went to approach her to ask her a question. And, I got basically my first flavor of the, VA. And that was this like mean mug in me, this smug, dirty like look, like gotta deal with it. And I was in uniform, everything. We're on the base. Oh, I gotta answer a question. I gotta deal with this person. And I remember I asked the question. I can't remember what it was. It was like a benign question, okay. And I don't even think the person even answered the question. And so there's such a lack of information out there about anything at all of what you would need to know. And now fast forward just 10 years later in my own experience, I mean, I'm getting like a whole education over there on YouTube on a couple of these, few of these different channels and stuff, and online, all this information. It just wasn't out there before, and the VA wasn't bother educating anyone about anything. It's maddening.
And that's really a sad part, is that I shouldn't be doing these videos. They should be doing that.
I agree, because they also have the operational budget that they are misappropriating inside these facilities to some extent. Yeah. And I know, because I've worked at them.
Why else wouldn't they do their own videos on telling you, for example, you need to write a statement to support your claim, for example, right? Well, why wouldn't they give an example of a really well-written statement of the things exactly that they're looking for, right? Exactly, right? They want to know, what your symptoms are that you've suffered from, right? They want to know if there's any functional limitations or impairment, right? So, I mean, but what do they say? Nothing. Right. So it's up to people like me to let people know, well, here are the parts of a statement you need to focus on with your claims. Because if you don't write a statement to fill in the gaps, the VA will fill in the gaps for you, and that means a denial's coming, right? So, but anyway, but yes, there wasn't a lot of information out there, which is why when I first started doing claims again in 2012, and I found the law had changed, that right away I thought, oh my God, I really need that 50%, right? So I can get all of my retirement and my disability. So what's the first thing I did? Again, what did I find online? Well, go to a VSO, right? A Veteran Service Organization, right? So that's what I did. I went to a VSO and I said, okay, I got all these problems, right? I think they're all related to service. And they said, okay, well, let's file claims for all those problems, right? And I'm like, okay, do I need to do anything? I didn't. I said, what, just fill out this paperwork? And it was like, yeah, just fill out the paperwork, right? So, I sent it back to them, and they said, okay, we're going to, send all these claims in. And I was like thinking, okay, good. I'm going to get it all settled. I'll have my 50% and I'll be able to, live my life, right? So I think we filed for 13 different things, and I got a denial back for all 13 things. Right. So I went back to the VSO, and the VSO goes, I said, like, hey, they all got denied. What's the next step? He says, well, we'll file an appeal. And I'm like, okay. And then I just started researching online, how do you file an appeal and what that's about? And so I called my VSO back up and I said, okay, you're going to file this appeal, but I mean, how exactly are you going to do that? I mean, I get you're supposed to fill out this notice of disagreement thing. And so he says, yeah, we're going to go ahead and tell them that we don't agree with their denials. And I'm like, well, okay, the set of information they have right now, they just denied all my claims. So you're going to go back to them and say the same set of information somehow justifies my claims? I mean, shouldn't we like say something else or add more information or say why? And they were like, oh, don't worry, we'll take care of it. So I'm like, those were unacceptable answers. They couldn't tell me how they were going to convince the VA without additional information that the existing information justified service connection. So I was like, okay, so what's the next step? I called a lawyer, right? And I said, I've got all these denials. Help me, please. What do I do? And so the lawyer said, okay, yeah, I think we can help you with these. So the next step was going to a lawyer. I think a lot of veterans follow this same path, right? They go to a VSO, they maybe find out they're unhappy with the service. So then they think, okay, obviously I need to pay someone. Let me go to a lawyer. And the lawyer in my case turned out to not be any help either. And it wasn't even the lawyer's fault. It was back in the day. Things are a little different now, but back when I got this lawyer in 2014, they had to send for your claims file just like a veteran's did. So before he could file,
talking about the C file?
Yes, for the C file, claim file, C file short for claim file. And by the way, for anyone who doesn't know, whenever you file a claim with the Veterans Administration, right, your very first claim, what they're going to do is they're going to send for your records from the archives. Those records are going to be moved from the National Archives, right, to the Veterans Administration. And they're going to create what they call a claim file. And all your records from the archives will be put into that file, as well as any other interfaces you have with the Veterans Benefit Administration will go in that file.
When you say interfaces with the Veterans Benefits Administration, what information would that entail exactly?
That would be basically any of your benefits will show up in that file, whether it's education,
like your communication with the organization. Like, is there, like if you call in, is that in there? Or
in theory, if they make a record of it, yes, it would go into the claim file. Often, if you call the 800 number, they don't make an entry, right? Usually, if you call the 800 number, you have to specifically ask that they make an entry for them to make one. Right? So, for instance, one of the problems I had was they collected a bunch of money from me saying they overpaid me, the Veterans Administration.
I've heard a lot about this.
Oh, believe me, there's
a couple lawyer YouTube channels that I like to watch because they have a really interesting, just kind of legal information about the military community as a whole, which in updates, which I found to be extremely interesting information. But they did a specific video about that recently, that very topic, and legal updates have been made about it. And it's just like mind blowing to me that the organization cannot get it together enough to where they keep doing this, because it seems like it's happening a lot.
Well, one of the things I found out when I actually got a copy of my claims file, when I was calling the 800 number, I kept a record. I called 18 times over a year, right? And in my claims file was one single note that was made from one of those phone calls, right? So although I called 18 times, there was a single entry that one of those operators made, which was a really nice entry. What she said was, he's tells me he's called numerous times about this subject and that he's getting no information, and I don't understand his situation, and would someone contact him from the accounting people to figure this out? Which
that is a nice entry.
No one ever contacted me, of course, right?
Yeah, go figure.
But anyway, so what gets in your claims file in your dealings with the Veterans Benefit Administration is sometimes less than what you might expect. Like I said, I was thinking when you call these 800 numbers, because they make you identify yourself, your social security number, your name, your address. I was thinking they were making some kind of entry, right? I mean, why would, I guess they're just was verifying it. And then what you talked about, they don't make a record, which didn't make sense to me. You'd think they would, but put it this way, if they do make entries, they're not including most of those entries in the C file, at least they didn't in mine, right? So, but typically, if you're putting in official documentation, requests for your claim file, appeals, letters specifically to the Veterans Administration, you should see all that end up in your C file, right, at some point. But anyway, with my lawyer, he immediately, once I signed the agreement with him, he sent for a copy of my claims file. And he even, he sent me, this lawyer was very good at keeping me informed.
So that's nice. That's a bonus, because That's not always the case.
It's not right. And so
Yeah.
what I liked about him was exactly that. So he sent me right away, said, okay, I've requested your C file. He sent me a copy of what he requested, right? So it wasn't just he told me so, he sent me a copy of the request, right?
Okay.
So that was great. But after 3 months, he sent me another email with the second request, which said, which was basically a carbon copy of the first, except he added another sentence. I requested this 3 months ago. This is my second request. I'm representing this veteran, and really, we only have 6 months left on the time frame to file the appeal. I would
Oh my God.
appreciate. So 3 months.
Oh my goodness.
3 more months go by. I get another email from my lawyer with a third request. A couple more months go by with a fourth request. A couple more months go by. We only had like 30 days left, and he sent in a fifth request. And in the fifth request, he's like, I don't want to say desperate, but he's like, okay, listen, this is
God,
damn request, right? If you guys would please send me his damn file, right? And so I was like, well, at this point, actually about at the third request, I started thinking that, you know what, he's not going to be able to file logical appeals for my claims because they're not sending him my claims file. Well, I already had a copy of my claims file. Of course, it was all on paper. Back then, they would send you paper, right? So it wasn't like I could send my paper, all that paper. I mean, there was thousands of pages. I wasn't going to like mail that to my lawyer, right? So plus, I even asked him, could I do that? And he said, no, I need my own copy, right? So, but anyway, so that's where I actually started doing my own research, right? Anything I could find online, right? And one thing I found that was really important was I found the adjudication manual, right? It's publicly posted. So I was like, okay, let me start reading this damn adjudication manual, find out what I'm supposed to do, right?
Yeah.
So I went through it page by page. I mean, it's a long manual, right? Thousands of pages, right? So I started reading it and reading it and reading it. And as I came across something that I thought was relevant, I would make a note and say, okay, I got to do that, right? And so eventually, my lawyer never got my C file until I went to my congressperson. I went to my congressperson after.
Oh, how did that work out? Was that because a lot of times Congress people are useless? So how did that work out for you?
Follow a logical path, which there's a logical way to do it, right? And to me, it starts with this, right? Is you have to keep your request so that you can show you requested it, right? And then you go to your congressperson and say, listen, and this is what I recommend all veterans do, by the way, if they're having problems, get their claims filed, right? Is wait like 3 months, right? And if you don't get it within 3 months, take the request that you sent. So make sure you keep a copy of your request, right? Because you always want to have evidence, right? So when you go to your congressperson, what's typically going to happen when you call your congressperson's office is they're going to connect you with the person in their office who deals with veterans, right? You're not going to like talk to your congressperson, right? You're going to talk to his staff, right? And there's always a person on staff that deals with veterans issues, right? And that's the person you'll end up talking to. And of course, they'll have you fill out the appropriate paperwork so they can deal with your claim. And then just give them a copy of your request saying, listen, it's been 3 months. I've only got this much left on my appeal time frame. Or, you actually shouldn't have to say that. But if you're in that situation, say that. You shouldn't have to prove you need it, right? But I would say after 3 months, that's to me waiting long enough. And go with that request to your congressperson and have them put in an inquiry. And the inquiry ask this person you're dealing with, the congressperson's office, to let you have a copy, or to at least inform you, right, that they've made this inquiry about, okay, he's waited 3 months. Why hasn't he got his file? And typically, that's the kick in the ass that the VA needs to actually send you your file. They're required to actually answer every congressional inquiry that they get, right? So it's a big deal to them. They have a time frame that they have to do it. So I
will add a note to that, though, because I have some direct experience with this. I'm just going to tell you, okay? The note I'm going to add is that the VA can and will give the runaround to the congressional rep potentially, as well. I know this is a fact, okay? And then, but if you have a good congressional rep that actually is invested in doing casework and doing their damn job, which is real iffy to say the least.
Exactly.
Which why, you know, people really got to be on that voting and have got to really try to get the right people in Congress. So a lot of them aren't so great. Then they can go take it. They can ask it. They can take it to another person. They can do. You know, if they do a good job, they can keep it going and not just be blown off. But the problem is, a lot of these congressional reps, they won't assist a constituent. They'll just blow you off. I know this is a fact. B, if they do, they'll send in some BS inquiry that ends up being blown off by, like, the VA as an example, or what X agency, and then that's it. That's it. They check the box, closed out, done. And that's your typical bad congressional rep. But, you know, some of them are better than others.
Well, you know, and I completely agree with that. And that's where it's up to the veteran to make sure that, you know, they're playing ball, right? And if you get some, because they'll send you a copy of the inquiry answer. And if the answer is like, for example, if you're asking for your claims file, they should be addressing that, right? Okay, yeah, he submitted for it. We went to the VA and the VA said, you know, they're going to send it to him. And typically that's the response, right? But if they give you some response like, okay, yeah, we know you're saying he sent for his claim file, but, you know, we don't know what a claim file is. So, you know, we don't, you know, I mean, if you get some ridiculous answer, well, hopefully the person you're dealing with at the congressional office will know enough to say, well, listen, are you going to send him his file or aren't you, right? And get another answer, right? But what I found is if you go to your congressperson, again, make sure you keep a copy of your request, right? You know, don't talk about maybes or ifs, or go to your congressperson and say, you know, I sent for my claims file. I don't really remember where it was when I did that, but I think I should have it by now. And, you know, but, you know, don't go there with, you know, ambiguous questions, because that's the kind of answer you're going to get. Go with specifics. Have a copy when you requested it to show how long you've been waiting, right? And I think if you go to your congresspeople with specifics, that you can get, you know, good answers, right? And I found it really does work. I've talked to many veterans that I've had take this route who, when they contacted their congressperson shortly after that, and what do I mean by shortly? A month or 2 or 3, you know, but, you know, that's what it takes. And by the way, I did both things, right? So I wanted to test how long it takes if you just wait, right? And I asked for an updated copy of my claims file, and I didn't go to my lawyer. It took 1.5 years to get an updated copy of my claims file, right? So you know, you don't expect things to move fast when you ask the VA for anything, right? But anyway, once so the lawyer thing didn't pan out, because by the time he got my claims file, it was really too late. He finally had to file an appeal in the dark. In other words, he just filed at the time he filed a Form 9, which was going to the board. And on the Form 9, all he put was, you know, we don't agree with the denials, because he didn't have a copy of my claims file. What could he say, right? So me and him did part ways, and I don't blame him at all, because they never sent him my claims file, right? I mean, the guy had a handicap. So finally, when I started researching things on my own, I was able to file new claims. And when I filed my new claims and learned how to get things backdated if it was possible, which I did find those possibilities, that I was able to get my rating all the way to 100%. And so there was no money left in it for the lawyer by the time he did get my claims file, right? So at that time, he said, you know, I would like to withdraw from your case because there's no money in it for me. right? Yeah,
Oh my God.
which,
You
by
know,
the way,
it's so impressive though how you just took matters into your own hands and just
you
figured
have
it all
to,
out
right?
yourself.
Is you couldn't like wait, and because remember what happened to me is financially I was becoming desperate, right?
Ugh.
I couldn't get a job. My savings were running out. We were underwater. I mean, we were going to end up under a bridge. I mean, we were going to lose the house. I mean, hell, it was on food stamps. My kids were on a school lunch program. I mean, because why? My retirement wasn't enough to pay, right? I needed, and no one would hire me anymore, right? So
That's what a lot of people don't understand is that the military retirement for most of the people getting out, it's meager. And in recent years, for new people joining, it's even worse. And I remember when I was getting out, I'll just be real with you. I remember, there was a lot of things that factored into my decisions, which I'm not going to go into all those factors here. But one of the thoughts I had was just like I said earlier, I was seeing people that were not in combat arms, mind you, positions, okay, that had a lot of like just broken bodies, basically. You name it, they had, just a lot of stuff. Seems like in the Army, the hot spots are the knees, feet, and back. That's a lot of what I see with the physical stuff. Those were the common issues I saw. And then, you have all these issues and you get out and you've dedicated, these prime years of your life to it. And then, I just felt when I was looking at the retirement and stuff that it was just meager. And, unless you become, an officer and, get into that whole thing. And I could have done that because the work I do now actually translates over perfectly to the military world. But on my way out the door, I actually was able to talk to the mental health program director. And they informed me that there was basically like it was basically a 10-year contract where you have no say over where you go or what you do or whatever. At that point, I was married. I wasn't really on board with that at all. I don't think I was on board with that, period. And get this, the packet to apply was like this. It was like this. They wanted like this much paperwork to apply to the mental health program. This much paperwork, okay? It was crazy. They wanted like paperwork from like everyone in leadership you'd ever come into contact with to write like a whole thesis statement about you. I mean, it was outrageous. And I looked at the civilian world and I realized that the paperwork was like this much paperwork, okay, to do the exact same thing, but in the civilian world. And I could do it faster. And then I can decide where I want to live as well. I could also quit jobs if I wanted to. And I thought, gee, that looks way more appealing. So it's exactly what I ended up doing. And I don't have to worry about all these physical injuries in the next 15, 16 plus years.
yeah, and that's absolutely true. And like, because you're so far behind your peers that don't join the military. I mean, when I got out at 37, for example, who was I competing with for jobs? 20-year-olds, right?
Mm-hmm.
22 or 3-year-old college graduates, right?
Mm-hmm.
An old bastard, right? Or are they going to pick, some person just out of college? They're going to pick that young person, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want my son to be at a disadvantage in the career field on earning or anything else because of that. So yeah, I would love it if they had a short enlistment. I would then recommend my son do that. But, I think 3 years is even too long for someone who you're still behind the times, right? So, but anyway, so what did I do after that point when I filed my own claims? What I was very disappointed with was that first set of claims that got denied in 2013 that I had to appeal into 2014, that when I was reading regulations and adjudication manual, I was finding reason after reason why they shouldn't have denied my claims. That they should not have, according to their own rules. Right?
Doesn't surprise me.
And when I asked for explanations, even to some very basic things, very basic questions, like they denied one of my claims because they said, because it was I needed to reopen it, but they said the evidence I submitted wasn't new and material, right? Because it didn't relate to the unestablished fact, right? And I was like, well, what does that mean? What's the unestablished fact? I mean, they didn't point out what it was. It was just a statement saying, well, your evidence isn't material to the unestablished fact, doesn't relate to the unestablished fact. And I'm like, okay, well, what does that mean even, right? So I had to do a lot of reading to finally figure out what the unestablished fact really meant, right? And all it meant was, what was the fact that couldn't be proved that led to the denial, right? So that is the unestablished fact, right? And so, but the thing was, I submitted evidence, for example, in this particular case, they said, they denied me because they said my condition wasn't chronic, right? What I did to show that it was chronic was to submit multiple treatments over multiple years showing it was chronic, right? And well, they still said that it wasn't relevant because it didn't relate to an established fact. Well, you see, in my mind, it did, because I was denied for it not being chronic. Now I can prove it was chronic. So how doesn't that relate? And I tried to get someone to explain why, and anyway, they couldn't. So I said, okay, when a veteran has a question, who's out there that can explain these things? And one of the first videos I did was I explained what the unestablished fact was, right?
Yeah.
Because I didn't want anyone else to like have to go through this long journey to figure out what a simple paragraph means.
Yeah.
Because they throw the legalism at you without relating it to your situation.
Yeah.
Right. And when they do that, that leaves you to try to figure out, well, okay, how does that legalism, I'm not a lawyer, right? You know, how does that relate to my situation, right? And so that's really why I started my channel, was I didn't want veterans to have to go through the same frustration I did, first of all, for getting simple questions answered, right? And just the question of, you know, what's my unestablished fact, right? Who's going to tell me that? VSOs couldn't tell me that. Why? I called all the VSOs in my area. I called all the major ones, right? VFW, American Legion, you know, Order of the Purple Heart, you know, all these different organizations that were in my area. And I would say, you know, what do they mean by that? Unestablished fact. And they all couldn't explain it to me. Not in terms I could understand. Right?
I think that the truth is that the VSOs, because I've worked, I'm familiar with them, to say the least. I think they truly, many of them, like what you're talking, really have no idea. They really don't know.
I agree. They just don't know. Because
of the fact that historically the VA has been not helpful, not user-friendly. And some of the people who work there just should not be working there at all, period. Because, you know, they're very anti-veteran, some of these people, to say the least. So I think that's really what boils down to. There's CCK Laws, like one of the lawyer groups on YouTube, and Hills and Potton, and I love them. I think they're fantastic because they have so much helpful information for veterans and stuff. And I've learned a shit ton of information of shit I just did not know, you know. Anyways, well, that shit didn't exist along with anything else useful back in the day. And so,
you know, I already tell you something. Listen, I always make fun of that in my videos, because there are things that they do that sometimes they don't get, that feet are like at the bottom of your extremity and they're called feet. And the knees are something different. It's up more. I already tell you, I have claims where they don't seem to know that, right? That, you know, the ankle bones connected to the knee bone. You know, they don't have that down.
Oh God! I left service as I was scheduled to. I went to the next state to meet up with my husband. He's still in the service right now. And he was stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. So that's where I went to from Washington State. And well, during this time frame, when I would call the VA about anything, you know, anything at all, they'd hang up on me. They'd tell me basically go fuck myself. They'd they would try to get me off the phone very quickly. I think that was like one nice person the whole time, but nobody would help me. No one helped me. No one knew what was going on ever. It was almost like, why am I even calling this number?
Yes.
Okay. What?
Yes, that's what it's like. I mean, this is what veterans experience in mass.
I already watched your videos really for entertainment value more than anything else, and my allegiance with you on your feelings about the VA. But so I learned from the VBA, this nice guy, that they actually don't hang up on me anymore or tell me go fuck myself. They started recording the calls. So I think that's really made a big difference. And so that's nice. What?
Yes, the recordings always help because then they think, damn it, someone might be watching.
Right, because so I don't get treated the way I used to. They actually answer questions and they're courteous.
I think the 800 number has improved vastly over the last few years.
Well, I just started calling first time in like 7-8 years. This is the first time I called in 7-8 years. So big time gap there. Because the regional number, basically New Orleans, Louisiana, regional VBA is mine. I fax it to them. Then I find out from the VBA phone number that they did not update the website. So there's no one in the building checking the fax machine, but all these faxes are still coming through. So that's why this stuff isn't getting updated. So then I went ahead and found out you need to fax this other number, the national number. And I complained about this to the White House hotline. They haven't updated it since like 2019. So I actually put a complaint about this to the White House hotline, which has become like a daily thing I call. And I also worked at the VA, which is a total nightmare, by the way. And I worked at 2 different facilities in 2 different states in 2 different positions. And that, just keep it brief. And basically, I reported misconduct and safety issues, which evidently is a big.
I remember when I used to go and was in contact with you years ago.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's when I was emailing you back and forth a few times when you were going through that. You had made some videos about that.
Yeah, I did. I know. I was like their real favorite person around that time. And so just to be clear, before I started making videos about my fun-filled experience at the VA, I tried. I'm a rule follower. It's a huge flaw of mine, actually. I've come to that conclusion. I'm a little too much of a rule follower. So I'd probably be good at law school or something. And I followed the process they had with other policies across the walls, papered. And it doesn't work, is what I'm going to tell you. Okay. They don't follow their own rules. I found this out from working there. So all this whistleblower retaliation stuff, they just don't give a shit. They ignore you. They don't help you. They enable the misconduct in the workplace, retaliation, all that shit. I didn't quit the job. I just couldn't take anymore. And a lot happened because I was being retaliated against. I mean, it was like a total nightmare. Anyways, and so then I also went through the legal process. I ended up dropping less than 2 weeks before my hearing. I ended up dropping it just recently. This just happened in late January this year after being ignored for like 3 solid years. When they filed a motion for summary judgment, I overcame it on my own. No lawyer, because lawyers mostly have not been helpful in my experience. Dropping it, but it's just like dealing with the VA has been a mind fuck ever since I got out of the Army on every level. It's been a mind fuck. As a veteran trying to get anything accomplished whatsoever, whether it be them like not losing my records and mixing me up with another veteran and giving me diagnoses I don't have, or as an employee trying to be treated with some measure of dignity and respect. And they have a serial predator problem. I actually just did a serial predator workplace violence video live event because I'm trying to raise awareness about, workplace harassment in general in America. But the VA has a for real serial predator problem at their organization, and offenders and harassers are protecting. And I think it has to do with the civil service system that's like inconvenient to do the paperwork to like fire these horrible people. So they just keep paying them for like 30 years straight. And in the meantime, there's like harassment, it's stalking, like workplace violence incidences happening at these VA facilities.